What was the time signature you just heard? If you thought 4/4, you're close. Here's what that percussion would have sounded like in 4/4. And here's what the actual groove sounds like if you would put a 4/4 click over it. Something's missing towards the end there. Let me explain. This rhythm starts in 4/4, which consists of 4 beats, all divided into 2 eighth notes. However, my rhythm in the end there goes dun. And here it turns into triplets, and I remove the last triplet. However, because the subdivision of the 4/4 bar is with 2 eighth notes, when I would remove one of those, it becomes a 7/8 bar, and that's too much because I'm removing one of those straight eighths, and I need to remove a triplet. So what I need to do is somehow recalculate this bar that the beat is not divided in 2 notes, but in 3. And all the Dora explorers out there are probably screaming right now, it's a 12/8 bar, and you're all completely right. So in a 12/8 bar, you also have 4 beats, but here each beat has a dot, adds the half of the note length to it, which in this case is an eighth note. So each beat is divided by 3 eighth notes. And now what I can do is remove this final eighth note, and I'm left with dun 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 pam, an 11/8 bar that has the rhythmic change that I need. And this is the core concept I used in the music for the final boss fight in our game Halve. By removing the last triplet from the second bar, it actually feels as if the music is chasing you and catching up to you. However, now the problem becomes, what do I do to get this rhythm back? So this rhythm, instead of writing it like this, just like this note gets 50% added to it by adding a dot, this note adds 50% to it, 16th note in this case, represented by a dot. Final thing I need to do is make sure my tempo works. Quarter note is 145, and here I need to make sure that a quarter note with a dot is 145. However, Cubase doesn't do tempos with quarter notes with a dot. Or maybe it does and I just don't know about it. In order to make sure that this happens, we need to recalculate what a quarter note is. Since a beat needs to contain 1.5 times as much information as it used to, it needs to be 1.5 times faster. So we need to do 145 times 1.5 equals 217.5. There we go. Simple math. Still keeping up? Great, because this is the part where we can start spicing things up by changing them a little bit. For example, adding a 5/8 bar after the 11/8, which extends the group of triplets. Removing the 5 triplets at the end of the 11/8, which extends the sequence and adds anticipation for when it will come back. Adding a 21/16 bar? Yeah, about that one. Remember this? The feel of a regular eighth note, a straight eighth note, is now a dotted eighth note long. This dotted eighth note has 3 16th notes in there. So the length of a straight eighth note, as we would read it in the 4/4 bar, is now 3 16th notes long within the new tempo, within the new context. If I want to have a 7/8 bar, as if this first bar were a 4/4, remember this is now a 12/8, but we are still thinking of it as a 4/4. It feels as a 4/4. We need to remove 1/8 from this feeling, which here would be 1/8 2 16ths. However, now 1/8 note is 3 16ths long. So instead of a 7/8 bar being 7 times a regular eighth note, this 7/8 bar needs to be 7 times a dotted eighth note, which means 7 times 3 16ths is 21 16ths. Using irregular and alternating time signatures is a technique often used in action or boss fight music to create a driving rhythm and unstable feeling. Time keeps shifting, so it feels like you always need to be alert to stay on your feet. In this particular instance, removing the last triplets from the bar enhances the feeling that you're being chased. The rhythm feels like the music is catching up to you, as the boss threatens to do while he is chasing you. By keeping the alt type signatures tied to this 12/8 and 11/8 alternation with different variations of it, I do keep some sort of familiarity while not making it utterly unpredictable. That changes when we get towards the end of the fight. I want the music to escalate as the fight does, so I want to make some changes. The first step is when we run in between different phases of the boss. In order to kick it up a gear, I move from the straight 8 into the triplet feel and place it on top of the whole thing. Later on, the ostinato is back in straight 8s to keep the familiarity of it, but the percussion keeps going relentlessly in triplets. And then finally, when you have almost beat the boss, he starts to get into some sort of frenzy. This is where the music becomes both more chaotic and more grounded at the same time. So we switch here from 12/8, 5/8 to 7/8. A 7/8 within this context, not this 21/16 bullshit of before. 2 11/8s, back to 12, then 7/5, because, you know, change things up a bit. Then a 13/8 and one final 11/8 for good measure. Now, if we add all of these together, that equals 93. Hello, this is Editing Tom. I just realized that I am skipping one 11/8 bar, and I also didn't do the math correctly. So this total actually ends up being 105, which still checks out later. However, every time you hear me say 93, it needs to be 105, which adds one extra bar. Very quick math that I did beforehand. If you divide that by 3, because remember, 3/8 notes within one beat, you get 31 beats. 31 beats consist of 7 times 4 is 28. So 7 times a bar with 4 beats plus 198 bar, which is 3 times 3 beats equals 31. I underline this by having a kick playing every 1 or 2 beats to underline this regular rhythm, while all this is providing the chaos up top. Ultimately, you end up with a signature track that looks absolutely cursed, but ultimately creates a cue that has an interesting rhythm, drives everything forward, and, most importantly, is closely tied to what is happening in-game. By removing this 8th triplet at the end of the bar, I make sure it actually feels like you're being chased. This rhythmic structure is a core element of this boss fight, and I want to make sure that while the boss fight evolves, the music evolves with it. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where I dive into how I broke this piece up into different sections, how I used transitions, and how I ultimately put everything into wise and in the game. I'll see you in the next one.